Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
This programme has learned that a flagship scheme meant to ensure children are being protected from sexual abuse in football was scrapped in 2003 by the Football Association. We've been in touch with people running the project back then who say that some FA staff were bullied into not talking to them. Our reporter Jim Reid has the story. Fill us in, Jim.
So this is back in 2001, so a good few years after some of these revelations of sexual abuse in football that we've been talking about recently. Now, 2001 is important for the Football Association because that's exactly when it launched its first ever strategy to deal with child protection in football. It was one of the first strategies of its kind in the world, so quite a big deal. Included new rules, for example, things like enhanced training, enhanced criminal records checks. Every club across the country had to have a designated welfare officer. And as part of all these rule changes, it commissioned a team of academics to come in and look for 5 years at the state of child protection in football and then effectively work out if these changes were having the desired effect. So this was a lot of money and quite a big deal for the FA at the time.
But there were problems.
There were. The first couple of years seemed to work OK. Then around 2002, there were reports that some members of staff at the FA were being bullied into not talking to these researchers. The researchers weren't getting some of the information that they needed. Some of the information they were getting wasn't being provided quickly enough. And it was around this time that people started to think the project was being scaled back. So 2002, the ambition, I think, was being scaled back. Some of the people they were talking to, they weren't allowed to talk to. Others, they were told, couldn't take part in this project.
Why did the FA do that?
Well, the researchers were told it was because of budget cuts at the Football Association. But around this time, the FA itself was in a bit of a state of flux. The chief executive at the time was a guy called Adam Crozier, seen as a bit of a revolutionary. He stepped down at the end of 2002. Some say he was forced out, replaced by a new team. And we know that by the end of 2003, this project that we were talking about had been stopped completely. All funding had been stopped. It had effectively been scrapped. So that's 3 years before it was due to stop its work.
And I think the main author then said she had to threaten legal action, didn't she, in the small claims court before she was paid. This, your revelation, obviously comes at a time when the FA is under intense scrutiny for its reaction to the revelations of sexual abuse.
Well, this is why we think it's important, because lots of people are asking, look, was the FA doing enough back then and in the 90s to deal with this problem? Is it doing enough now to deal with child protection in football, to make sure basically our kids are safe if they're playing the game, both at a sort of semi-professional level and a grassroots level as well? And that is something I think that the authors of this report were concerned about. The lead author was a woman called Celia Brackenridge from Brunel University, and she said a couple of years after this project was scrapped, the whole situation left me asking myself whether some of the senior officers in the game might not simply be using child protection as a kind of ethical fig leaf, as she puts it, to cover their embarrassment at the many problems facing the game, doping, crowd control, bungs and fixes, among many others.
And what is the FA saying now about your story?
Well, they're saying, look, they can't comment at the moment because there is this big independent investigation by a QC into what the FA was doing and is doing about child protection in football. But the boss of the FA, a guy called Greg Clark, was speaking more widely yesterday about the policies that are now in place to protect children.
I think we've acted very quickly, to be frank, because what the main thing to do is not to encumber the criminal investigations of the police by tainting their evidence. And so we've agreed with the police we won't talk to any of the victims formally because they have to talk to them, they have to take statements, and we're not allowed to interfere in that process. So we've taken advice on how to set up both an audit of our practices and also making sure we have external supervision of our inquiry. Those conclusions will be the external QC's conclusions. The FA will not write them. So we believe we're doing as much as we can to make sure that we step up to the mark and are in a position to be able to disclose everything that happened.
Thank you very much, Jim. Let's talk now to Damien Collins, Conservative MP and Chair of the Commons, Culture, Media and Sport Committee. Good morning to you. What do you think about this project being pulled back in 2003 by the FA, 3 years early?
It's extremely concerning, and it helps to feed the impression that many people will have is that people within football were aware there was a problem in terms of child protection. People at clubs, people at the FA We've seen stories and reports saying that Chelsea may have paid a player to keep his silence about abuse. That reports were made to the Football Association about abuse in the past, and things weren't followed through as they should have been. And I think people will now look at this story as well and say, well, is this further evidence that there were some people within the Football Association that didn't want to pursue this as properly as they should have done, which may have meant that stories of abuse went unreported and uninvestigated, and indeed it would question whether the current safeguards we have in place are adequate.
Why would it question whether the current safeguards we have in place are adequate?
Well, I just think if there's been a problem for many years with this, and this may only affect, and probably does only affect, a very small minority of people, but nevertheless, these are some of the most serious crimes that could be committed, so it's incredibly serious. We understand them fully. If we don't really fully understand how the system has been abused in the past and why it has been possible for people to do that and go undetected and the crimes go unreported, and for football to fail to step in, if that's happened in the past, then it has to question whether the current arrangements are adequate enough. Are there enough safe spaces where someone can go, a young person can go and report an incident that has happened where they've been the victim of abuse?
What do you make of the claims in Jim's story that the researchers, the authors, found that some staff at the FA were, they said, bullied into not talking to them?
Well, I think this is incredibly significant, and I think it takes us on to the area of the FA's internal review. This has got to look not just at actual allegations of abuse that were made and how they were dealt with, but also the culture within football as well. Now, how were people treated who were working on investigations, or the researchers on this important piece of work as well? Was there a culture which encouraged people not to share information and not to talk? And I think that's what we have to get to the bottom of. When Dame Janet Smith was commissioned by the BBC to look at allegations of abuse around Jimmy Savile and why it was people at the BBC weren't aware of it, didn't sort of call it out sooner, she was asked to look at the culture within the organisation at the time too, and that's crucial here. I must admit, my concern about the FA's internal review is that it's going to be very narrowly focused on very specific allegations people were made and how they were dealt with. Won't look at these wider cultural problems, and crucially won't look at what happened within clubs as well. I think it will only look narrowly at what was taken to the FA itself.
Well, as you know, the FA are meeting today to discuss the terms of reference for their inquiry. But it sounds to me like before they've even begun, you don't necessarily have 100% confidence in it.
Well, I've got concerns. I mean, the FA have hired a QC who's worked for the FA before, who's part of a set of chambers that do regular work for the Football Association.
Doesn't mean that QC can't be independent.
Absolutely not, although she's not experienced enough for the job. But so there's a relationship there already, so it's not someone totally new who's been brought in. And what I would like to know is, will she have the freedom to write the report as she sees it and publish it herself? Or will it be published through the Football Association, and will they have the final say on what's included? We've seen lots of investigations in football in the past where the people that commission those investigations are ultimately responsible for what's published. And will she have the freedom to say, actually, I want to take this inquiry broader, there are important things that we need to look at? Will she have the freedom to do that? Or is it narrowly going to be a review simply looking at the complaint procedure and the handling process within the FA on individual cases and not look at these broader concerns?
Eric Bristow has called footballers wimps over their sexual abuse allegations. What do you think of his comments?
I think they're a complete disgrace. I mean, and it's shocking that he should say that, and shows a total lack of understanding and empathy for people that have had their lives destroyed by the abuse they suffered when they were boys.
You referred earlier to the reports in the Telegraph today, reports that we haven't been able to confirm, that Chelsea sanctioned a secret payment to a former youth team player who accused an ex-scout of sexual abuse. Yesterday, Greg Clark, the head of the FA, called those kind of payments morally repugnant. How would you describe them?
Well, I think his words are well chosen. It is morally repugnant that should happen. I understand the club are investigating, but I think, again, this is an issue too. So the club have hired, brought in a law firm to investigate how that was handled. This was only a few years ago, so why they need to bring in an external law firm, I don't know. But the FA should include these things within their review as well. It should be, they are the governing body of football. Their review should be not just of the internal processes at the FA, but of the culture within football, including at clubs as well. So I think things like this should be included within the scope of the FA's review.
You're right to point out that this was only a few years ago. This was not the 1980s or the 1990s. It was actually 3 years ago. I wonder if you think other secret payments may have been made by clubs to suppress the reporting of sexual abuse?
Well, I mean, I don't know whether that is the case, but obviously that will be that will be a concern. And again, I think that's why it's important that this football review, is allowed to sort of go across football and across clubs to try and understand more about what was going on. There will be, of course, there's the police investigation, which is a criminal investigation into what are criminal acts. But alongside that, it's important there is a proper review of within the culture and practices of football towards child abuse. And I think what was mentioned by the researchers on the project at the FA earlier on is quite right as well. My concern is, whilst child abuse is in many ways the most serious end of this, there are cultural problems within football, around bungs, around payments, maybe around doping as well, which need to be understood. And, are there proper places where someone can come forward and say, I know this problem is happening, I've got information about it, I don't have documentary evidence on me, but I think you should be investigating it. And where does that person go?
Good question. Thank you very much. Thanks for talking to us, Damien Collins. Claims of historical sex abuse in football are growing on a daily basis, as you know. Let's talk to our sports news correspondent, Richard Conway. What is the latest, Richard?
Well, Victoria, as you were talking about there, claims in the Telegraph today from about Chelsea, about their former head scout, and about claims that within the last 3 years a secret payment was made as essentially hush money to stop an alleged someone who's allegedly been abused from going public. They said that the Telegraph say they reported this to the Metropolitan Police. A payment was then made, and all parties, claim the paper, are bound by confidentiality rules that forbid them from talking about it, even from their lawyers talking about it. Now, Chelsea, in response to this, say that they've retained an external legal company to launch an investigation into this, and they say that they will also be cooperating with the FA in their inquiry.
And you've got more on Eric Bristow.
Yes, now Eric Bristow, as we know, tweeted a series of things about the victims of child sexual abuse that we've seen in football. It caused a lot of controversy. A lot of people were very offended by what he said. People saying that it actually set back people maybe coming forward and talking about this. He's since deleted all of those tweets. He appeared on Good Morning Britain on ITV this morning to apologise, but what I understand is that the BBC last night asked Eric Bristow if they would come on, if he would talk about this. Eric Bristow's manager asked for a fee of £5,000 in order for him to appear and talk about this issue. We can hear now from Eric Bristow. He was talking to GMB this morning, and he's talking to Marilyn Hawes, who I believe her family have been affected by issues concerning child sexual abuse.
Can I talk to him?
Yeah.
I'd like you to have the good... Excuse me, Eric. I'm over here. I'd like you to have the good manners, if you could, to actually hear what I'm going to say. Is that possible? I am the mother of 3 sexually abused children. I don't know how that makes you feel, but from the back of that, I've created this charity. I find you the most deeply offensive man that's breathed oxygen. And quite frankly, if I had a set of darts, I would stick them where the sun don't shine. And I sat with people last night that you have harmed immeasurably. And if you think that what you've said is clever, let me take you through what a bully is. You are a bully. And let me tell you what abuse is, shall I? Abuse is, and I would like you to listen, and I want you to explain to me what you got out of this, what your motivation was. Please answer those shortly, and I will then carry on. What was your well, we know what your motivation is because you think it's helped.
Now, it's the right to reply. I've listened to what you said.
Yeah, go on then. We'll carry on then. About you. I haven't finished, but carry on.
The right to reply is I want youngsters now to go out and complain straight away. That's the whole idea of the whole thing of this is the power of TV. If people are watching this. Look, I went out with a young lady years and years ago who was abused.
You're very lucky.
And if you touched her, she jumped. I mean, they're scarred for life. I know this. I know what's going on in life. All I'm saying is, stop it now.
Well, we don't know if Eric Bristow has been paid for any other interviews, but we will certainly be putting the question to him and his management team today.
Thank you very much, Richard Conway, who is our sports news correspondent. On the programme tomorrow, we'll be talking to 2 more players who were abused at one football club and describe how it has continued to haunt them for 20 years.
Now, more than a quarter of the police forces across England and Wales have now opened investigations into claims of historical sex abuse involving football clubs and their youth teams. With more former players coming forward to report alleged abuse, clubs ranging from Newcastle in the north to Chelsea in the south have now been drawn into the web of claims. Our sports correspondent, Kay Zarin, reports now on allegations against another coach who was named by 2 youth players we've spoken to, including one who says he was assaulted during an away trip to Blackpool. And a warning, his report contains details of the alleged assault.
More allegations about abuse by football coaches. And more shocking details. This time in Blackpool. Back in 1984, Jason Dunford was 11. He'd been invited to join a new football team in his hometown. They came here for an away game, stayed overnight with the coach and 2 other boys in the same bed.
It went dark, it was the night, middle of the night, and I was awoken to, not a boy's hand, I was awoken to a man's hand starting to touch my leg, probably from knee up to groin. Must have been a couple of hours later, it was still dark. I remember it was dark in the house and the curtains were dark. I then started to hear the boy to the right of me release sexual gratification. At that point I froze and thought, oh no, not again.
Are you convinced that the other boy in the bed was sexually abused?
100%. 100%.
And this is alleged to have happened, says Jay, at the home of a parent the coach appeared to know well. Jay says he told the police last week, but is still waiting to give them a video statement. He wants to know why the delay, and he's so angry he's made an official complaint.
You've spoken to the police about this?
Spoken to the police about this.
Are you satisfied with their response?
I'm absolutely disgusted. I've sent an email to the IPC, the Independent Police Complaints Commission.
Have they responded to you?
I've had no response from them whatsoever, which I'm upset about. I understand other boys' feelings now, where they didn't get very far with these allegations back in the 90s.
Jay says he's now had calls from 30 former players making allegations about this same Northwest-based coach. At least one other player we've spoken to also claims to be a victim.
We've heard accounts from 2 players about a coach we're not naming for legal reasons. A coach they believe would have had access to boys from across the Northwest. And they believe he may have committed many more acts of sexual abuse.
Overnight, a Premier League side, Chelsea, confirmed they were investigating claims they'd paid off an ex-player to keep them quiet. An alleged abuse victim of former chief scout Eddie Heath, who went on to work for other clubs.
I knew Eddie for a long, long time. I joined Chelsea when I was 10 and a half, and I had the pleasure of meeting him then. So yeah, I would say my childhood at Chelsea was an extremely happy one, along with a lot of other guys there as well. So naturally I was surprised last night.
Alleged confidentiality payoffs must end, say many.
The FA should tell clubs that they must tear up these confidentiality agreements to allow the victims of abuse to come forward and share their stories.
More than a quarter of the UK's police forces are now investigating allegations from Scotland to the south coast, including Cheshire, who've been told about what allegedly happened one night in 1984 in Blackpool. And the big fear of the players we've been speaking to: were their alleged abusers working together?
Kamian Zeran reporting. Well, earlier we spoke to the police body in overall charge of the investigations, the National Police Chiefs Council, the NPCC. We were told it would not be making any comment into an ongoing investigation. John.
Another former footballer came forward today willing to waive his anonymity to speak of what he went through at the hands of an abuser at the heart of the game. And like his colleagues who have already come forward, Derek Bell urged others not to live alone with the terrible secret, but seek support from those who can help. A third of all UK police forces are now investigating allegations of sexual abuse in what is thought to be the biggest crisis in football for years, affecting some of the biggest clubs.
Chelsea is the most high-profile club so far to be dragged into this ever-widening net, with allegations a former youth player was sexually abused by an employee. It's understood the claims surround Eddie Heath, the club's chief scout during the 70s, who's now dead. It's claimed Chelsea paid the alleged victim to keep quiet when he threatened to go public 3 years ago. Former Chelsea and England footballer Ray Wilkins was taught by Eddie Heath.
I knew Eddie for a long, long time. I joined Chelsea when I was 10 and a half, and I had the pleasure of meeting him then. So yeah, I would say my childhood at Chelsea was an extremely happy one, along with a lot of other guys there as well. So naturally I was surprised last night, yeah.
Chelsea say they've employed a law firm to look into an individual employed by the club in the 1970s. They say they've also contacted the FA to ensure that all possible assistance is given to their wider investigation. Essex Police and the Norfolk Constabulary are the latest of 14 forces to say they're investigating reports of abuse. There have been at least 250 calls to the police and around 20 former players have come forward. Former Newcastle player Derek Bell today talked about the sexual abuse he suffered during the 70s while playing for a local boys' club and its devastating impact.
He bribed me, he blackmailed me. He said I couldn't play football if I didn't consent to these acts. So it was a horrendous time for myself and my family. It has an effect. I drank a lot. I tried to commit suicide. I was on the other side of the Tyne Bridge at once. I was down by Spillers, if you know the people in the North East know Spillers, the warehouse on the quayside. I was wanting to jump in. It eventually come to an end where I was in the garage with a hosepipe in my car.
The scale of silent suffering, which went on behind the scenes in the game for so long, continues to emerge. Neil Connery, News at 10.
A former Newcastle United player who was sexually assaulted hundreds of times by one of his coaches has told this programme he considered killing his abuser before instead helping to put him behind bars. Derek Bell was groomed and abused by George Ormond between the ages of 12 and 16 while playing for the Montague and North Fenham Boys Football Club in the northeast of England during the 1970s. More than 20 years later, he confronted Ormond and secretly recorded a conversation with him before going to the police. We can speak to him now in his first TV interview. He's waived his right to anonymity to talk to us. Mr. Bell, thank you very much for coming on the programme. Explain, first of all, why you have decided to speak out.
Thank you, Victoria. Obviously, reading the news at the present time, I was a victim of sexual abuse from a predator in the late 70s. And I've always wanted to come and speak out about what happened to me. The court case in 2002, I claimed anonymity, but I think it's time. I've always wanted to tell my story, not for myself, it's for other people to make the awareness and raise the awareness of the child abuse in the 70s and 80s and 90s and possibly. I've heard the horrific stories that people have went through and are still going through, and if I can help in any way, bring people to come forward, don't be ashamed. It was a culture in that time. There was no checks, there was nothing. There was establishments weren't geared up for what they are now. So I want to come forward and tell my story in the hope that other people will pick up the phone, and help other victims come forward.
In the late 70s, as you say, and this happened to you, I think, between the ages of 12 and 16. Can you tell our audience what George Ormond did to you?
Horrific. It just, you couldn't imagine. Every sexual act that you can imagine, he did. It was just horrendous. I can't. I lived daily for 42 years, I'm 53 now, for 40 odd years. I've never had a proper night's sleep. I wake up shivering, crying, horrendous, intrusive thoughts that go through my head.
Can I ask where this took place, where the abuse took place, Derek?
Yeah, I was a young lad at the boys' club in Newcastle. And I was only a young boy, inspiring. Everybody wants, a young kid at a football club, boys' club at that time, wanted to be a professional footballer. I was no different. I had a talent, and scouts at the time. There wasn't the academy systems in place. Coaches at the time. If you had a set of cones and a bag of balls, you were classed as a coach. And there was no DBS checks what there is now. So the attacks happened, in the boys' club. He used to drive me home. He befriended my family. It used to happen in cars, car parks. It happened in my house. He befriended my family. At the time, he was only a young man himself, and he got into my family, and horrendous things happened.
So he would stay at your mum and dad's house, and in the middle of the night he would be abusing you?
Yes, which it was unbelievable to think. I've only just told my mum. I didn't tell her it happened in the house. I only told her the other day but it was going to come out, and that, you know, things were happening in the house. He used to make excuses to stop overnight. He used to threaten me, you know, if I didn't do these acts. He would tell the scouts, because, you know, I had a lot of scouts from the top clubs at the time: Burnley, West Brom, Everton, Newcastle, Sunderland, all after my signature. And he would tell them that he wouldn't play players. He would threaten us that I wouldn't go on, you know, trips away with the boys' club. He would tell them that, just horrific things. He would try and bribe me. He bribed my family to turn up and take me home.
He had groomed you, and he was blackmailing you. It sounded like he had total power over you.
Total control. That's what the is to, you know, the evil men, and, you know, that's what they do. They befriend you. They befriend your families, and you put trust in them. You know, you put trust in them. He said to my family that, you know, keep me under his wing. I'll make sure he's a professional footballer. I'll make sure, if you let me, you know, nurture Derek through coaching, I'll make sure that he becomes a professional footballer, which is all absolute rubbish. His total sole aim was to get to me and you know, get me to conform to these sexual acts and threats and bribery and blackmail.
Tell me what impact this was having on you as a boy growing into adolescence.
At the time, you know, as I say, I signed schoolboy forms for Newcastle when I was 14. I represented my county. I was captain of the Newcastle boys. You know, I had a talent, and you know, once I left and went to Newcastle at the age of 16 and become an apprentice, it was only then that I actually got rid of the guy, because he moved on to other people. He moved on. I wasn't good enough for him now because I was out of his way. So I kept in silence until around about 1998. You know, I'd never seen the guy. I didn't want to see him, but I've went through attempted suicide. I've been sectioned under the Mental Health Act for my own safety. I've been, you know, I've been on suicide watch when I was sectioned. I've had treatment, mental health treatment. I still get ongoing treatment now, because I can't at times cope with it. I was like a runaway train. I feel as though now I can come out. I'm strong enough now, you know, to say to, you know, lads that's been affected. You know, we were kids at the time. You know, we didn't know what was going on. We just inspired. These people groomed you. And if I can help come out and speak about my experiences to help other people, don't be ashamed, don't be afraid. It wasn't your fault.
You eventually left football. You found work helping asylum seekers settle in Newcastle. And you saw this abuser around the area where the asylum seekers were staying.
Yes, I did. What happened, I worked for the Newcastle City Council Housing Department, and for 25 years, part of my role within that was about the 1998 time, 99 time, was to help refugees that were being dispersed throughout the country be rehoused into areas like Newcastle, Glasgow, Manchester, and my job was to help these people settle into the housing environment, help them with doctors, schools, things like that, and that's how it came about that I seen this guy.
Where did you see him?
He was in a hostel in Newcastle. There was a hostel for where the sort of stationed refugees before we picked them up and rehoused them. And one night, about 11 o'clock at night, I was in the ground went into the grounds of the hostel, drove into the grounds in a minibus, and there was a silhouette, a guy hiding behind a tree. We'd been made aware that, you know, there may be to be vigilant about, you know, National Front and people who were objecting to these people coming into the northeast. So I thought it was just somebody, you know, that might be. I didn't know who it was. He was hiding behind a tree. I went into the hostel. I spoke to the manager. I says, listen, I think there's somebody outside. They put CCTV on at the time. It wasn't great. So I says, listen, I'll go out and I'll question the guy who it may be. So I walked out to the grounds. It was dark night. This guy was hidden behind a tree with a hood up, and it was George Ormond. I couldn't believe it. You know, these vulnerable 14-year-olds. He was obviously trying to get into these vulnerable kids that were coming to the region, and it was just devastating for me to see this guy, knowing that he was still preying and prying on young children.
Sometime after that, you decided to confront him, I think, you went to his house and you took a knife with you.
Yes. I'm not ashamed to say it. I just didn't know what to do. This was 20, 30 years later. I'd tried to get him out of my mind after all the therapy I'd had, and I just said, no, I've got to go and kill this guy. I can't live anymore in Newcastle because he's around. And I went to his house. I kicked his door in, and lucky for him, he wasn't in that night. And then neighbours came around. I searched the house. He wasn't there, and I had a 12-inch knife. And if he had been in that night, then I would have been done for murder, which I didn't want to be. I then thought about it. Came out of the house, the neighbours came round, and I left the scene. A couple of days later, I told my friends. I said, listen, I can't live anymore. It was the first time I'd told them. I sat them all down. I said, listen, I was abused as a child. This man who they knew had been doing these acts. So what I decided to do to get the evidence, I went to his door. And a couple of days later, on a Sunday morning, I had a tape recorder in my pocket, and I questioned, why did he do this to me? Why did he bribe me? Why did he blackmail me? Why did he do these sexual acts against me? And all he was interested in saying is, are you going to go to the police? Are you going to go to the police? He never said sorry. He never once said sorry. He said all he was concerned about was me wanting to go to the police. So I stayed about 5 minutes. He'd sort of admitted that he did the acts. You know, he didn't say that he didn't not do them. He admitted he did do them, but never at one time did he say he was sorry. I then took the tape. I got my friends around, and I played the tape to them. They were absolutely devastated that this man had, you know, admitted to these offences. I then spoke to Northumbria Police. I contacted Northumbria Police and worked with them for 2 years to take this man to court, because other people came forward at the time, and eventually got the conviction against this guy.
Yeah. Jailed for 6 years for indecent assault. Quite an extraordinary thing for you to do, Derek, to go round to his house to confront him face to face and record that conversation in order to help convict him.
Yes, I mean, because if I didn't, I'd probably end up a murderer. And why should I suffer being, you know, stuck in prison when it was him who'd ruined my life? It was him who'd ruined me. Why should I suffer of doing something that is wrong? You know, I wanted to do my way to put him in prison and let him suffer what he's been done to myself, not myself, but other people.
I want to read you a couple of comments from our viewers. Chris is watching you speak right now, Derek, and he says, huge respect to you for speaking out. This tweet from Angela, the ex-footballer speaking now on at Victoria Live, is a brave man. It breaks my heart what happened to him as a young boy. I wonder if you think Newcastle United could have done more to protect you at the time?
In all honesty, the club were aware that I went to court. You know, they were aware it was me because they were interviewed by Northumbria Police because Ormond, although he had no official capacity at Newcastle United, they used to have a hostel next to the ground where young boys were taken from Scotland, Ireland, all over the country to come on trial, and they were stayed in this hotel. I was aware that Ormond was visiting that hostel on a regular basis. I spoke to a person at the club who then informed the club. I then went to court. Again, one thing I will say, which I want to come out and say, I can't thank Newcastle United enough for what they've done for me over the past 5 days. From the owner to Lee Charnley to the people at the club, Mr. Ashley, everybody have been absolutely tremendous in the support they've given me. However, it was a different regime at the club at the time, and let down. To this day, I've never had a phone call from anybody in the hierarchy of the club at that time to say, how are you?
But do you think they knew back then, Derek?
Yes, of course they knew. They'd been interviewed by Northumbria Police because I worked at the club.
I want to read you a new statement which has just been released by Eric Bristow. You will know
Who?
About his comment. Eric Bristow.
I don't know that.
You do. You do. It's the darts player who made those comments on Twitter a couple of days ago.
That man lives in the gutter. That man lives what he has come out and said. And if he thinks footballers are wimp, if he thinks footballers aren't strong, just tell him to come and have a chat with me.
I would love to introduce him to you, Derek. I'm going to read you a statement that he's just released. A new statement. And this is what he says now. On GMB, I described myself as a bull in a china shop, and that has always been the case. It makes me furious to think that an abuser can get away with it for so long, and to so many, when they should always be looking over their shoulder in fear, waiting to be confronted. I don't use PR people to run my social media accounts, as some do, and now appreciate my wording was wrong and offended many people when all I was doing was venting my anger at the abusers and encouraging kids to act ASAP. I know why I've been vilified, but if one child comes forward quicker or one abuser thinks twice about the likelihood of being confronted, then it will have been worth it. Any monies offered or received for any interviews with me will be donated in full to a relevant charity. What do you think of that, Derek?
I actually watched the Bristow interview on GMB this morning, and I cried. It took him about 15 minutes to actually say he was sorry. He didn't come out straight away and said he was sorry for what he said. He knew what he was said. I watched that interview, and it's only now when he's actually sat down and thought about what an idiot he has been in saying these things that he's come out and made that statement now. But I watched that interview, and if people have watched that interview this morning, he didn't come out straight away and say what he's saying now.
Let me read some more comments to you, Derek, if I may, from people who are watching you around the country, and they are full of respect for you, I have to say. This tweet, Derek, on #VictoriaLive, I'm truly humbled listening to this. After all he went through, not only speaking out now, but also made a career protecting vulnerable refugees. Joanna says, I'm very proud of you, Derek, and so many people saying that what you are doing is deeply courageous. What would you say to anyone who perhaps was abused when they were a young boy playing football in those decades gone by, who has never told anybody, who may not feel they can speak out?
Please, the whole reason myself, Paul Stewart, David White, Andy Wood, are coming out, David Lean, we're coming out now, and you know, justice should be done for what happened in them days. You know, and if I can help, the only reason I'm coming on shows like this and speaking out and making things public is to raise the awareness. It's not about me. It's about to raise the awareness that's maybe still going on in football or other sports, not just football, in life in general. You know, there is these predators around, there's these animals around. And if I can help one person come out who was a victim of George Ormond or a victim of any other football club at the time in the 70s, you know, that's all I'm doing this for. And if I get one person to come forward, please pick up the phone. Don't be ashamed. We're not wimps. You know, we're grown men now suffering. But it's not just one of the points I also want to get over. I've had 3 broken marriages. I've turned to drink. I've had therapy, you know, the best therapy in Europe. I still suffer. If I don't suffer in silence, guys. You know, we are a team. We're together. Please pick up the phone to these authorities. Everything has changed now. Everything. The police are acting a different way. Football clubs acting a different way now with academies and welfare officers and safeguarding. There's a lot of things in place that wasn't in place in these when we were kids. Please come out and speak.
A couple more comments, Derek, if I may. Another tweeter says, Derek on Victoria Live showing what a real man is. This text from Jan. Derek, I for one am very glad you didn't go through with your plan to kill. You are a better person than him and a very brave man. I wonder finally, Derek, if I might ask you what your thoughts are towards George Ormond.
I don't want to talk about that.
He's not worth discussing?
No.
No. And that's fair enough. Thank you very much, Derek. Thanks for coming on our programme.
Thank you.
Really appreciate your time. Derek Bell, waiving his right to anonymity, to talk about the abuse that he suffered between the ages of 12 and 16 in the late 70s by a scout when Derek was at Newcastle United, abused 2 or 3 times a week for 4 years. The NSPCC helpline, which offers advice and support to anyone who's experienced sexual abuse, is, as a young footballer, is 0800 023 2642. That's 0800 023 2642. And on the programme tomorrow, we will talk to another former player who says he was abused by his coach. He'll be giving his first interview to us tomorrow.
I've been getting away with it.